Good morning, U2 Nation. Today's word I'm bringing is from Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Just the first half of that verse is, "But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness." The second half of that verse says, "And all the rest of these things will be added to you." In the immediate context, he's talking about anxieties of life, clothing and food, etc. But I want to focus more on the initial part where he says, "But seek first." This is something he's telling his disciples, the ones who sat from the beginning of Matthew 5. We see the Sermon on the Mount, and it's important to know the who, what, where, and why. So here it is there was a crowd following, but Jesus is specifically teaching his disciples. And a side note, a disciple is different than a believer. This is one who has committed himself to follow the teachings of Christ and to live a life of sacrifice, sanctification, and obedience to God's will. Anyway, to proceed, we're going to seek first. Seek means to, or implies, or denotes a sort of obtaining, or to seek after, to sought out, seek it, to be sought for, and to obtain it. Something that's not quite in front of us or visible, maybe even lost, but we are to seek this thing and to find it, to obtain it, so that we have this kingdom. Again, he says first, so I think that's key. The first here, it signifies primary, foremost. This is to be the first thing that a disciple does beyond mere belief of salvation. And again, when he's talking about kingdom of God here, we have to consider who he's talking to. He's already talking to believers. So kingdom of God is not meaning heaven or salvation in this aspect. They already believe, so they're already saved. What he's signifying here is something different. And I believe that he's talking about there are different aspects of the kingdom. Some past theologians say already, not yet, and there's been other aspects. Partially I agree with that, and partially I don't. We already do have some benefits that we can live by and obtain life blessings. There is sort of an already of pronouncement of the kingdom, or a proceeding of the kingdom. There's also the power of the kingdom, driving out demons, so on and so forth. So we see those aspects of the kingdom are here, but the not yet, or what some others do, is that what they're referring to, and I know that they go off in a different direction, it is to the future millennial kingdom. I believe is when I say not yet, there is a future. So it's not really not yet. There's just different aspects on the kingdom as we look into it and study. So anyway, proceeding ahead, the kingdom of God here is, and His righteousness is an ethical righteousness as opposed to an imputed righteousness. We see that when Jesus is talking here, or Paul, between Jesus and Paul, the Apostle Paul, talking about righteousness, the imputed righteousness would be, for example, Romans 5:1, Philippians 3:4-9, 2 Corinthians 5:21. This, however, is an ethical, because in the greater or broader context of the passage, Jesus is teaching his disciples, for example. He'd say, beware not to practice your righteousness in front of others, but to do things in secret to God. So when we practice something, that isn't something we already have. It's a character that we develop. We have to go through. So if you look in the greater context of the whole Sermon on the Mount and all his teachings, Jesus is teaching his disciples, believers, how to live now here on earth with expectations of future rewards. He speaks of rewards, a future status, And what I mean by that is he did say that there will be those who are least in the kingdom, and those who will be great in the kingdom. And he did that in context of teaching of the law. So when we're looking at that, we have to examine other passages and say, that your righteousness must, Jesus said, your righteousness must surpass that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Again, we can go off on a tangent, but what he was saying here, if we examine the righteousness of the Pharisees, theirs was an external, legalistic form of righteousness. So what Jesus is saying here, that the disciples' righteousness in the future kingdom, millennial kingdom, will surpass that of the Pharisees and scribes on the external. What Jesus is saying, that yours is an inward through the new covenant. It's a heart. It's an inward, heart-based, love-based, love-motivated. So it examines our motivations. Jesus takes us into teachings, as we see a lot, that goes into our thought life and into our underlying motivations as you examine a lot of his teachings there. Anyway, back to the main passage here. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. So basically, when we're seeking his righteousness, God's kind of righteousness, it's basically what God says is right, his will. Not our righteousness, but his righteousness. So again, this is an ethical characteristic that we have to live by, and a character lifestyle, and what we'll call that a kingdom lifestyle. So anyway, as we come into this closing, I'll keep it short. If you're a disciple, just like here, Jesus is calling us to the narrow path, to the narrow way. This is a life of self-sacrifice, obedience, sanctification, holiness. He's calling us to a higher level than a mere entry level. You know, if you are an entry level disciple, that's kind of where I consider myself. And we're on a path taking where we decrease and he increases. You know, as John the Baptist said, I must decrease and he must increase. Again, it's about sacrifice. It's about giving up. It's about being less of you and more of him. And it's about how we treat others and how we live this life here on earth. And when we do that, Jesus does promise that our reward will be in heaven. We will be called great in heaven if we strive to live the diagram that he has laid out for us to live. Anyway, God bless y'all. I love you. That was just on my heart. Wanted to share it this morning. So be blessed today. May the Lord keep you and be gracious to you and give you peace. God bless.